welcome to LexTalk World Talk Show presented by ClickAway Creators. Today we have Mr. Jason D. Gellman with us. He is Associate General Counsel at EPCOR USA Incorporation. Thank you so much for joining us, Jason. We are pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you, Ben. Good to be here.
Awesome. We are pleased to have you with us. And we are going to talk about some questions on the pandemic, COVID-19, how the legal industry has been sailing through this pandemic. And we would be keen to learn from your experiences and your expertise as in how you have been able to tackle those problems at your end, at your workplace. But to start with, we all would like to know more about your professional and personal background. So if you can please brief it about that.
Yeah, definitely. I've been currently Associate General Counsel at EPCOR USA, Inc. As you stated, I've been there over probably 3.5 years at this point. My main practice areas are in the public utilities area. EPCOR it's actually a multinational company that's based out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, provides utility services all around Alberta, but I work directly for the US company, which provides water and wastewater services in Arizona, New Mexico, and then natural gas services in Texas, as well as wholesale water service operations in near the Austin and San Antonio areas. I've been practicing over 20 years, most of it in the public utilities area. There's a lot of, it's a complex, niche area involving an interdisciplinary crossroads of economics, finance, accounting, as well as engineering, and it's an essential service and has been even before COVID, obviously, given that we're in the water to wastewater business. So I had some experience as a state public utility regulator for the Arizona Public Utility Commission, called the Corporation Commission, and then I was in private practice for over 10 years before I joined EPCOR.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for that quick brief about yourself. Moving ahead and taking my first question for the session, we would like to know about the COVID-19's impact in the North American region on essential service sector, and what kind of solutions do you foresee from a legal perspective?
As I stated, the public utility area is an essential service and has been an essential service, obviously providing wastewater and water service, which maybe is the most fundamental essential service. Without those, life doesn't exist. So we have an obligation and are heavily regulated to make sure that when people's faucets turn on, the water's there, that wastewater is safely and properly taken care of to preserve the health and safety. And we are regulated in any state in the US by the State Public Utility Commission. Some have more authority than others, depending on how they're set up. Some are constitutional, most are set up by the statute and legislature. But all of them have a pretty extensive grasp into regulating the public utility area. So that, if anything, that is probably going to increase in terms of the amount of oversight that the state commissions have. I know they're very keen on making sure that customers receive water and wastewater service, even if they have trouble paying their bills. In a lot of states, the state commissions have either ordered or encouraged, for example, the suspension of disconnections. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, even before COVID, there was a lot of attention paid to us by the regulators, even though there's not a lot of media attention given to public utility regulation. It's sort of like I guess to use an American football analogy, it's sort of the offensive line. Nobody notices it until something goes wrong. But we're always heavily regulated, and that was the case before COVID. And it's going to largely maintain or stay relatively the same afterwards. But there will probably be certain areas that the state utility commissions pay more attention to preserve the public health and safety. And that also has impacts on kind of the side I deal with more than anything, which is the establishment of rates. How do we maintain those services and make sure that we can go out and get financing on reasonable terms so that we can continue to provide essential services. And those are kind of the issues that I see coming in the we're sort of dealing with the public health and safety realm, but we're going to have to deal with the economic impacts of increasing bad debt expense and what have you. It gets very complex very quickly. But that's what I see down the road as a continuation of the public safety sort of focus, but eventually we're going to have to tackle the economic impacts.
Absolutely. And being into essential services, it is always important to stay connected to the people in states and keep giving those services, even if it's pandemic or something else, so we have to keep going. And I can really understand where you're coming from. Those challenges are actually going to be in the future. There will be in front of us in the future, and we'll have to go through them. Thank you so much for sharing that great insight on that particular topic. Moving ahead, being a legal professional, what are those 3 core values that you truly believe in?
This is probably no surprise to anyone that the number one trait that I think every attorney, every legal professional should have is integrity, especially in my little niche corner of the world, because there's maybe in Arizona, there's maybe 20 practitioners that practice state public utility regulation for a living full time. So we all know each other. We run into each other. I have constant interaction with the commission staff, especially in Arizona and to the lesser extent, Texas. And if you do not keep your word, if you try to be evasive, deceptive, you're going to lose your reputation. And in a small legal area like that, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that sort of practice in the more niche areas, water law is another example of that in Arizona, you're going to have a hard time gaining any ground, being persuasive with the regulators, and particularly with the regulatory staffs, which are really, the commissioners come and go, and certainly you have to be honest with them, but it's even more of a priority with the regulatory staffs that are often career professionals. And I think, and this is maybe the more difficult part, is the ability to be straightforward with them, to cut to the chase, just give it to them straight. That kind of, there's a friction there with our duty of confidentiality to our clients. And there's certainly things that they can't say, or you can't say to the regulators when you're dealing with them, and to other private legal representatives of private parties. We deal with developers, for example. But if you're straight with them and say, look, there's certain things I can't go into, but here's what I can tell you. At least they understand that you have this obligation of confidentiality to your client. You have an obligation, but at the same time, you're trying to be as forthcoming as you can. And that has been, I think, successful for me. I'm proud to have built up a reputation of being a straight shooter and a person that people, I think, can trust, to the extent that, we're on opposite sides a lot of the time, and there's always going to be friction, and it's occasionally adversarial, but you try not to be a jerk either. I mean, I think that's kind of toe and toe with that. And that's maybe the third trait is professionalism.
True.
I guess the example, I have a loud voice. I've been called out on it. Sometimes I don't mean to come across the way I do, but sometimes it inevitably happens, and you're just kind of conscious of your professionalism, and maybe I need to tone it down a little bit, maybe be a little less emotional or what have you. Even if I think sometimes I'm just being me, but it doesn't come across that way. So you're always conscious of being sort of that level of professionalism, along with you're just not a jerk. You're not a jerk to people. Maybe people are jerks to you, and it doesn't mean you don't have to be firm and maybe let them know, hey, this is not acceptable. But especially in front of the commission, especially in a heavily regulated industry where everybody knows each other, I think those 3 traits, I think, have been critical. We're all lawyers. We obviously are all intelligent, despite what I know some lawyers say, oh, this person's stupid or what have you. I never subscribe to that. I think if you get through law school, you're certainly intelligent. So I assume that, and I think, that's a given. So, but those are at least the qualities I try to live by and try to show others.
Fantastic. I think it really makes a lot of sense. And honestly speaking, I think not just if you're in a niche sector or into a niche practice, but wherever you are, if you follow those three core values, and if you try to inculcate them in your careers, in your professional lives, that's going to take you a long way. Thank you so much for sharing those great insights with us on that question as well. Moving ahead, I'd like to move on to the next question now, and where I would like to know, what do you foresee in terms of managing legal costs in light of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, and this is one area where we saw a trend, I think, before the COVID pandemic starts, and this is where maybe there's an evolution rather than a revolution. Managing legal costs in my area, and I don't want to get too nichey, but we have to, as a publicly regulated utility, we have to go in and seek new rates and get authority from the commission to do that. And one of the elements that they look into is rate case expense, and that's the cost of outside counsel, outside experts. And the commission, I think over the last 10 to 15 years, at least what I've seen, is been looking at that more meticulously, scrutinizing it a lot more than maybe in the past. I think that's because the complexity of these cases only increases, and so the costs rise. And so there was a movement, I think it's been going on for years, to move a lot of the rate, regulatory, I guess, oversight for utility in-house, and that includes outside counsel. And that was one of the drivers that, quite frankly, moved me in-house. In light of COVID, and maybe this gets more to the economic impacts than the health and safety impacts, is that there's going to probably be even more scrutiny over managing costs. We're going to have to be more discretionary about how we litigate, what we litigate, and how we ultimately determine to adjudicate the rate requests that we go in for with the public utility body. So I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny because our recovery is at stake, because we can't just go in and say, okay, our costs are rising, so we can just float past that through. We've got to go in and get approval for that. And it's a political body, no matter whether it's an appointed commission or an elected commission. So that becomes a very significant concern. So I think the evolution is more scrutiny, more movement towards in-house, particularly with attorneys and accountants and rate experts. And I think even our largest investor-owned utility in Arizona is Arizona Public Service Company, and their legal department that goes in front of the State Corporation Commission is now pretty much almost, I would say, 100% in-house. When I see the attorneys appear in front of the commission, it's in-house attorneys, with the exception of maybe locating transmission lines. That was a really long answer to probably a pretty simple question. But I would say the short answer is it's an evolution of what we're seeing already.
I think it was not really long, because the complex situation, what you just try and elaborate just right now can kind of really makes a lot of sense and gives a lot of insight to our viewers as well. Moving ahead, and this could be our last question for the session. What legal resolutions have you had to address and adjust due to COVID-19?
Okay, this is where I think there's probably been, I wouldn't call it a revolutionary impact, but you've certainly seen separate dockets, items that have been open, dockets that have been open that would not have been open but for the pandemic. And the one that I can think of and probably use as an example here is the issue of terminating service for those utility customers that are delinquent. Obviously, COVID has had massive economic impact. I mean, I know that, I guess the New York Times, Wall Street Journal released jobs numbers, and unemployment is slowly receding, but now we have cases jumping to in Arizona, US is 120,000, in Arizona and Texas, I think we're seeing very similar trends to the country. So there have been, with the Texas Railroad Commission, which regulates natural gas, I know the name's sort of a misnomer, but they do regulate natural gas services, as well as the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, have instituted dockets and rulemakings and orders to say and it's in every state sort of its own laboratory when it comes to utility regulation, but essentially you have to suspend disconnection of services for as long as the pandemic exists, whether it's an emergency order from the governor or whether it's something, a different metric that they use. So that is something that utilities are dealing with, and most are complying, if not all of them, and they want to comply. We want to comply. The last thing we want to do is terminate services for customers. That doesn't do us any good in the long run. But obviously, it costs money. You have to figure out a way to deal with again, I keep harping on the economic impacts down the road. And I think that what we're seeing in the here and now is these kinds of orders coming from the commission, these kinds of rulemakings coming from the commission that says, New Mexico is an example. If there's an emergency, if the governor orders an emergency, something along those lines, you will have to suspend disconnections for natural gas, electric, water service, and the like. Arizona, it's a little interesting. They didn't institute an order or a rulemaking. It was more of we highly suggest that you do not terminate connections, which we were already doing. We terminated or suspended our disconnections starting in mid-March, and we haven't resumed disconnecting customers. So that is the immediate impact of COVID. That's the legal resolutions we're seeing. Now, there's this other component, the economic component, that talks about, okay, there's some cost to these. The utilities obviously continuing to provide service to these customers, but they're not getting any money for it. And it can get pretty high. I think it's 5% of our overall revenue requirement for our New Mexico Clovis operation. So it's a significant chunk that we're now growing it as a what we call bad debt expense. I think it's and I never pronounce this right. The percentage in arrears, I guess, is another way to put it. So what you're seeing in Texas and New Mexico is I think they've allowed for deferral of cost to deal with in the next rate case, which I kind of alluded to I forget which question I alluded to it on. So they're allowing, okay, put these costs into a certain bucket and we'll decide whether and how utility you're going to recover them in the next rate case. Arizona hasn't done that yet. They've sort of decided to do more of a case by case example. A utility in their rate case asked for deferral. We have a current rate case going on in Arizona, and I think we're toying with the idea of whether and how to request for that. And I guess that gets to another big point in my industry, and probably I would suspect in a lot of the attendees out there, is that sometimes areas are heavily regulated at the federal level, or there's that sort of federal state cooperation for like environmental law. State and public utility law is not like that unless you're in the electric transmission area, and then you have the federal regulators. But we have operations in 3 different states, and it's 3 different commissions with 3 different frameworks that basically set the rules of the game, have their own rules and regulations, different ways of how they process a rate case, and different ways of how they're dealing with this pandemic. So you're seeing resolutions, but they're all a little different because every state likes their own, has their own framework to regulate, and you're sort of trying to figure out how you maintain consistency company-wide, because there's a friction there as well. A lot of things to think about. In a lot of ways, still an evolution of issues that we've tackled before, but obviously this area is complex, and I would not be dismissive of there's probably a lot of complex issues that we're going to have to deal with that we haven't even quite thought about yet, because of you're at a crossroads of so many different professions when you're in the utility business.
Absolutely, you are. And this is, again, a very complex issue. You can't really start discontinuing the services of those essential services for being delinquent. And at the same time, the cost that is keep increasing, and the arrears, as you rightly said, I think the right word to put that is arrears. You can't really call them bad debts. So, I think it really makes sense, and it is a complex issue, a lot to learn to our industry folks on that. And when we have you speaking at our conference in the month of March, I'm sure we'll be able to better discuss on that when, we will be connecting again on the 18th and 19th of March for the LexTalk World Conference. Thank you so much, Jason, with that, for sharing such great insights with us. I'm sure it has It had a lot of things to learn from out of this. And if there are any questions, this is for our viewers. If you have more questions on this, please put in your questions in the comment box, and we'll try to have Jason answer to those questions as much as we can. But thank you so much, Jason, for your time today and for sharing such great insights. It was lovely talking to you, and I would love to connect with you again in future to discuss on some other legal topics for the legal industry. For our viewers, if you like this interview and if you would like to have more coming from the industry leaders like Jason, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Clickaway Creators. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Vinay for LexTalk World.